in this exhibition, Making Art Print, we have the work of a selection of work from the Graphic Studio in Dublin. The Graphic Studio was established 60 years ago in Dublin, and for this exhibition, Sharon Murphy, the curator, has taken a selection of work by a number of artists who are associated with Fingal area. Either they're from here, or they live here, or they work in the area. So the exhibition is very traditional in its presentation. You have prints that are either etchings or silkscreen prints that are printed on paper, framed and hung on the wall. On the exhibition downstairs, called New Impressions, you will see a very different form of presentation, still using traditional printmaking techniques, but using a different form of presentation. Now let's look at some of these exhibits in this exhibition here. So let's take these two. These are etchings by James Haynes, and they show us two houses, derelict houses. We pass these type of buildings and structures and spaces every day as we walk through our lives, as we drive past. And it's interesting to look at the idea that the artist took a deserted building and a deserted, forlorn-looking, broken-down house as their theme. The artist in this instance has this is an etching, and an etching is a process where the artist draws into a prepared metal sheet of metal, what we call a metal plate, covers it with a surface, a waxy surface, draws into that surface, and then places that plate into a bath of acid, which eats into the drawn areas, producing a pattern which can then be inked over and pressed into paper, and this is your result. The artist can work into the print by using different methods. In this instance, they have used a number of plates, the metal plate, and have overprinted one on top of the other, which gives a very interesting surface and an interesting texture and technique. In contrast, we have a screen print here, which by Desmond Kenny, which is really, really colourful. And a screen print is a process that comes from the 1930s, where a screen was made with like a frame that has nylon, like nylon curtains stretched over it, and designs are cut out onto it, and then the ink is pushed through those surfaces. And again, you build up. You use 1, 2, 3 different screens to build a texture and to build your picture. Screen prints are usually brighter in color and brighter in texture, lighter in texture than etchings. And this just has to do with, I suppose, the process that the artist uses. So this is by Desmond Kenny. You can see shapes that are like the residue of a bottle or a cup left on a table. Areas that are drawn and very loosely drawn, areas that are tightly drawn here, like geometric drawings, and all using lots of bright and very, very vibrant colour. And this artist, Desmond Kenny, is very well known for his use of colour. Let's just have a look at some more pieces. 2 more etchings by Jason Earley, and they show us Howth and the Bailey, two very distinct landmarks in the Fingal area. And again, these are etchings, but they also use an aquatint process, which aquatint process is where you have little grains of resin that are powdered resin that are shaken over the etching plate, the metal plate, burnt with a candle or a flame, and then put into the bath of acid. And that aquatint process gives a very soft, very, very soft texture, which is ideally suited for showing the Irish landscape, the Irish skyscape and waterscapes. What else have we in this exhibition? We have a very, very beautiful etching of a winter tree. And this winter tree, without its leaves, is very lace-like and very suited to the method of etching, where you draw into your plate and using line and using very close tonal range of colours. We have an etching here of someone just having great fun in the sea. And again, we must remember that Fingal has such a wonderful coastline with a lot of swimming groups. So here we have this woman just enjoying being in the waves, and beautiful drawing, again very suited to an etching process. And the line of the water just swirls around and around, and again using aquatint and etching to give a sense of line and a sense of texture and a sense of movement. In contrast, we have two more screen prints, and they're very punchy and very similar to what we are used to seeing in advertising billboards, which use the same process of screen printing. We're now with the exhibition, the second part of the exhibition at Tríocht, Making Art Printing, which is called New Impressions. And this features the work of 4 contemporary printmakers. Again, using traditional techniques of screen printing and etching, but in a very different way, in very, very different ways. And the first thing that you will notice as you come into this exhibition is how different the presentation of the work is. Some work is framed and hanging from the wall, but lots of the work is very sculptural. And sculptural work with printmaking is often something that we don't think about. So let's go through each person's work and have a look at their work, and I'll guide you through their themes and ideas. So here we have the work of Neil Dunn. And Neil is very interested in the urban landscape in which we live, the urban landscape which we pass through every day as we're walking through the city, as we're stopped in traffic and looking at things. And he takes his imagery from billboards, from broken down buildings, from hoardings around building sites, the things that we walk past, often without looking at. He looks at the colours on those structures. He looks at how they're decayed, how they've been weathered by rain, by wind, how graffiti has been put on them. And he has a very interesting quote from Charles Baudelaire, the novelist Baudelaire, that sums up his thinking as an artist, which I will give you now. Baudelaire says, "Sometimes he is a poet. More often he comes close to the novelist or the moralist. But he is the painter of the passing moment and of all suggestions. And this quote that Neil Dunn has given us really gives us an idea of how the artist thinks and works, and thinks and works and works and thinks. In his physical work method, he uses paint and screen printing. So here we have some screen printed images that echo often what we see on billboards around the city. And he has painted then over them. He has introduced collage elements, found objects, in this instance, a piece of timber that he picked up from a building site, and a necklace with a medal on it that he found. These add textural interest. They also add to our sense of being a passing through a place. We see things, we pick things up, we discard things. His work is very large, which suits this expressionistic method of work where he's painting large brush strokes and then again some screen printed imagery, very like what we see on billboards. So he is really interested in our urban visual landscape, and he takes his inspiration from our urban visual landscape, as does Fiona Kelly, in a very different way. Fiona Kelly's work, she is very interested in what's left behind, just the detritus of things, of pieces of plywood that are thrown out at the side of building sites. Let's have a look at this. This piece here, screen printed on plywood, very, very like an urban billboard or a hoarding around a building site. Sometimes you'll find a hole in those hoardings and you can look through. In this piece, Fiona Kelly has shown us what happens at the corner of a building site. There's things thrown there, but nature is coming in and nature is growing and plants are reseeding themselves amongst all the rubble and amongst all the discarded things that begin to rot, begin to decay. And she is asking us to look at our urban landscapes that have been allowed to deteriorate, to rot, to break down. She's asking us to look at what we call the edgelands, the places that are forgotten, the corner of the building site, the corner of the car park, where a lot of things are just thrown there. Maybe the wind has blown things, but always how nature comes in and retakes over and replants itself. And even though we think as humans that we can control our environment, we can't. She is showing us that no matter what happens, nature takes over and nature will, I suppose, conquer in the end. Her work is very involved and interested in, as I say, detritus and the landscape around us. And she has used the shape of a house, very simple shape of a house made from cast off plywood from building sites. And she has screen printed scenes of grass, of plants, of flora and fauna, of rock faces by the sea, of the sea itself. And she has also put the word fragile. She has screen printed the word fragile onto these surfaces, really, really impressing on us the fragility of our landscape and the fragility of time passing and what time does to surfaces, to our landscape and to our environment. A sense of place is what links all these four artists in this exhibition. Neil Dunn is interested in the urban landscape. Fiona Kelly is interested in the urban landscape and the decay of what happens when either weather or human beings disregard the landscape. That sense of place and that sense of where we live is very important to artist Margot Galvin. She also uses discarded materials. She also uses screen printing to make her works which show us her interest in contemporary architecture in our cities and those pieces of architecture which act often as landmarks for us. We see the tower, the water tower, we know we're near home. We see her colouring is very, very urban. It's a very bright coloration that you see on advertising billboards all over cities and towns. We're very used to that now, and we pass by those colours and those images. Sometimes we don't really see the shapes and colours and textures of them. And this is what Margot Galvin is drawing our attention to. She's also drawing our attention to the materials that are used in our towns and cities. Glass, metal, perspex, timber, and the shapes. Circles, rectangles, made shapes, non-organic shapes that we all live with and perhaps influence how we move around our spaces and how we look at our lives and our landscape and where we live. So a sense of place and where we belong is very important to all the artists in this exhibition, and particularly important to this artist, where she uses architecture to give us a sense of where and how we live. Aoife Scott's work, on first impression, looks very traditional. Framed work on the wall, screen printing. But as we look closer, as we get closer into the work, we will see that it's made up of screen prints with pieces of plastic, either collaged into the work or already part of the screen printing process. And like the other artists, a sense of place is very important to Aoife Scott. And prior to this selection of work, her work was focused on the past and dereliction and ruins and how places fell back into the landscape and how the landscape took them over. And then she started thinking of the present and the future and started looking at our throwaway culture, the things that we find, the pieces of plastic that are everywhere in our lives, under our feet, on our streets, on our beaches. So her work became very rooted in the now and the future. Her work has become very rooted in a tactile, modern tactile way that reflects our throwaway society. So if we look at this screen print, very, very beautiful, lush, very engaging surface, very engaging colour, and then we look more closely and it's printed on plastic. And does it become more interesting? Does it become uglier because it's on plastic? I don't know, but it's a question that we have to ask ourselves. And this is the question that Aoife Scott is asking us as viewers of her work, how we read her work. If this was on very beautiful paper, would it have the same impact as on a piece of plastic that we could roll up and throw away and be discarded? We also look at her sculptural works, which are cast resin crumpled up milk carton, stuffed full of just those bits of plastic that we find everywhere. There's little toys, bits of toys, packaging, pieces of string, plastic string, a cast lemonade bottle or Coca-Cola bottle, soft drink bottle, another milk bottle, scrunched up, filled with plastic bits. Just bits of plastic. Beautiful colours, very alluring, but bits of plastic that we know will probably outlive us all. So she has made a series of these, again, to draw our attention to what is around us, what we're surrounded by, and asks us, what do we do about these? So, to reiterate, the exhibition, New Impressions, is about our sense of place, how we live now, what influences us as living in an urban environment, the detritus, the rubbish that we're surrounded by, the bits and pieces that are everywhere, and how we can look at them. Are they just rubbish, or can we make them into interesting things? Can we use them as a source of inspiration, as these artists have done in this exhibition? And again, we're looking at printmaking processes in a very different way, where artists have used printmaking to make sculptural pieces. They've included painting and printmaking in a very fresh and very different format.